Hello, everybody. Uh, Unfortunately, where I've been filming is also one of Goose's favorite spots to lay during the day. We're not going to move him this time, but we will also try and squeeze in on the chair in a second. If you can see, though, at least he's not asleep this time. He did just wake up from a nap, though. Oh, he did a cute little turn. Too bad you guys couldn't see that. So adorable. Anyways, you may notice there's even more stuff gone now. We've been packing up a little bit more. You can see some of what'll soon be the old apartment. That goes into the kitchen, bathroom to the right, one of Ava's grandpa's paintings. We've got a lot of those up. This is one as well. And then we've got 3 winter scenes right here. All his. This is my desk. Actually, it's awesome. I don't know if it'll pick up on the microphone here, but this monitor, it's curved, if you can't tell, but it's so big. Let's see, that when you sit down in front of it and talk towards it, it kind of makes an echo. Again, I don't know if it's going to pick up on the mic, but in person, that's what happens. We're sitting in front of the monitor, by the way, that's why the screen was black. Some needlepoint stuff over here. Over there as well, that we got at one of the Brighton Bazaars one time. Ava's desk. And bedrooms in there. You can see one of the bookshelves. That's double stacked, so there are 2 layers of books on every shelf. And some stacked up on top. Yeah, you can see that already. And there's the bedroom. That's pretty much it. And here's the closet with the games and movies and shit. The light. The light in the ceiling. It's just like a shitty LED. It takes AAAs or AA's, or either way we ran out of those. And the batteries ran out of juice, but you can see we got... Hopefully it's bright enough you can see some of this. We got games and movies and stuff and coats and vacuums in here. Gotta turn the lantern off. These were some recent Blu-ray pickups. All of these. We'll talk about movies sometime. Well, that's pretty much the apartment tour. The door frames are, let's see if I can get this in shot. Yeah, the door frames are short enough that I would hit my head on them, as you can see here, if I did not duck a little bit or bend over. But it is what it is. And we are back over here. So yeah, today... Alright, go scooch over. Just scoot a little bit. Oh, I can just sit right here beside of him, actually. Ah, damn, that sounds way too bright. I'm gonna close the blind. 1 second. Okay. Let's see. Pinocchio is what we're talking about today. It's not, the first book I've read this year, but it's the first book I decided to talk about for this series, which is completing my backlog of books. This is episode 1, and we're talking about, of course, come on, dude. Come on, camera. I love these cameras. I do one thing to complain about with them. You can see the top of Goose. He's licking his crotch. Cleaning his tail, really. Anyways, is the autofocus. These things are incredible cameras. I have the S5 is what this is being filmed on. I also have the S1R that I use for photography. Everything is great about them except for the contrast-based autofocus. Could be better. I don't know if it ever focused on that, but this is my copy of The Adventures of Pinocchio by Carlo Collodi. Could be pronouncing that wrong. And the expense of the lenses as well. These are L-mount lenses. So I don't have very many lenses for them because the people that make the lenses more or less are Leica and Panasonic now. Panasonic hasn't been doing it for long, so they don't have many of them on the market. The ones that are available are a bit expensive. But anyways, we should talk about Pinocchio, not the camera. I loved this book. It was way funnier than I expected it to be, and it was way more profound as well. It had some real messages, I believe. But the humor was, it would come out of nowhere, and it would honestly make me laugh out loud. Like when Pinocchio was, well, after, gosh, it's actually been a while since I've read this. Geppetto? Yeah, Geppetto. The guy who made Pinocchio out of wood, that he got from his friend a block of wood, which we'll talk about that in a second. But the part that I'm getting at here is after he sorry, I'll bleep that out. Maybe I won't. After he gets arrested, and because the townspeople think that he's abusive to Pinocchio, when Pinocchio's an out of control delinquent, and he's just trying to discipline him and instill some real morals into him, and integrity. Oh, there Goose goes. He jumped down. So I'm going to take a spot. It's warm. All right. Zoom in a little bit. And what happens is he gets arrested, so Pinocchio goes back home and has to take care of himself. He's alone now. And he gets really hungry, and he tries to fry an egg or boil an egg. I forget. I think it's fry, because he cracks it, and a full-grown chick comes out, and he talks like a gentleman. And he's like, "Oh, thank you, good sir, for letting me out of that egg, and preventing me from, the tiresome trouble of cracking it open myself." And then just flies off, and Pinocchio doesn't get to eat any anything. That's all he could find in the house, and he doesn't get to eat it because there's a chick that just flew away afterwards. And so he resorts to deciding to go out into town and just knock on people's door and ask for a piece of bread or something. And so he goes, and the first door he knocks on, he's knocking on the door, and the guy answers from the window above. You know, the bedroom must be on the second floor. He opens the window, and the man in the house is like, "What do you want?" And Pinocchio asks for a piece of bread, and the man thinks, for whatever reason, he thinks he's just a prankster kid. So he goes and gets a bucket of water and dumps it on him from the second story window. He's like, all right, stay there. I'll be right back. I'll get your bread. And he comes back and soaks him. And fucking, he's the man was the teenage prankster, really. Comes out of nowhere with a tub of water on the poor beggar kid. But so Pinocchio goes back home still hungry and wet, and so he starts a fire, and he just, decides to have sleep for dinner. And but he's at least going to try and dry himself off, so he starts a fire. He doesn't want to go to bed damp. He is made out of wood after all, and he sits by the fire, and he props up his feet to warm them and dry them off, but he ends up falling asleep sitting there like that, and he wakes up, and his feet, both of them, are burnt off, and they're just charred little nubs. And so when Geppetto gets let out of jail and comes back home and knocks on the door, and he's like, "Pinocchio, let me in. I know you're in there, you little rascal." Pinocchio gets up and tries to go answer the door, and he just falls over because he's got charred little nubs instead of feet, and can't walk. And he yells out, "Geppetto, I can't open the door. I don't have my feet. They're burned off." And Geppetto doesn't believe him at first, but eventually, he climbs through the window or something, and ends up, making Pinocchio new feet, seeing that he wasn't lying, making him new feet. And then Pinocchio's like, "I'm starving. I haven't had anything to eat." He tells him about his night with the chick and the man and the water and the fire, and then Geppetto, who had picked up a couple plums or something on his way back from the prison, that he had meant to be for his own breakfast, takes them out of his coat pocket and gives them away to Pinocchio. And that is just one segment, a very short part of. It's a very short book. I read this in, I don't know, started it one day, finished it the next. It's only it's under 200 pages. My copy is like 160 or something. But the absurdity and the outrageous humor, that goes all the way through the book. That was there in that one segment. And I know I didn't do it justice just trying to explain it like that, but it's crazy, it's outrageous, it's funny, but it also has, like I said, some really, what I see as profound messages or deep messages. And two of those, actually, we see in that portion we just recounted, and that is Pinocchio being a developing child and not having the self-control or awareness or concern for others that are required for someone to act appropriately in the presence of others, in the interaction with others. Pinocchio just thinks about himself. He lies all the time. He he always goes back on his word. He always does Geppetto dirty. Not always. By the end, and we'll get to that, he is changed in more ways than one. But he just thinks about himself. He doesn't think about others. That's it. He doesn't control his actions in a way that are conscientious of their consequences. And education and discipline of the youth is supposed to be about instilling in the developing young ones a sympathy for how their actions affect things outside of themselves, and also affect themselves in the long run. You have to think not so narrowly. Some of you may have heard of the marshmallow experiment, the self-control experiment. And, this might be something about like neurophysiological development more so than, never mind, I take that back. Neurophysiological development can't be separated from psychological development. There's one individual, there's one organism that is not able to be broken down into separable parts like that, like neurophysiology and psychology. That's ridiculous, so never mind. But anyways, what I was going to say is there is a change in children you see at a certain age where they, when left in a room with a marshmallow, after being told, if you don't eat the marshmallow while I'm gone, the researcher says this, or the teacher says this, the authority adult figure in the situation, in the study, they say, you have this marshmallow in front of you. You have two options. I'm gonna step out of the room. You can either wait until I get back to eat the marshmallow, and if you do, I'll give you another one. So if you wait, you'll get 2 marshmallows. Or if you do eat it while I'm gone, you're only going to have the 1 marshmallow. When I get back, I'm not going to give you a second one. And then they leave the room, and children up to a certain age, I forget what age that is, so don't believe me when I say this, but for the sake of giving a number, let's say it's somewhere between like 6 or 8, or 5 or 7, something like that, 6, is when this change happens. Younger than that age, or on the younger side of that range, whatever, younger kids are more often than not going to eat the marshmallow while the adult is gone. They don't have the control or the foresight to know that if they like marshmallows and they want marshmallows, the better decision would just be to wait, the 10, 15 minutes, however long it's going to be, until the teacher comes back, so that they get double the amount, But children, over a certain age, older children are able to make that judgment and forestall their gratification for, a greater benefit in the future. So there's that, the inability to have the foresight into how your decisions may or may not lead to a better outcome or a worse outcome further into the future than what is, presently happening. What's beyond the instant gratification. So there's that, and then there's also children up to a certain age lack theory of mind abilities. They're unable to put themselves in somebody else's shoes, essentially. So there's an experiment where there's this mountain landscape. So the mountain is in the middle of this diorama, and on one side is, a scene of a forest, and maybe there's a farmland cut out over to one side. And then there's the mountain. And on the other side of the mountain is let's say like a pond, uh, a pond and a fisherman and a little hunter's cabin. So you have those two scenes, you have the mountain in the middle. So you have the child sit on one side of the mountain, where they can observe one scene, and then the mountain is blocking their view of the other one. And then the researcher sits on the other side. And the researcher asks the kid what they see, and they're on this side, so they see the forest and the farmland, and so they describe that. And then they switch seats, so the researcher is now on this side, looking at the forest and the farmland, and the kid is now on the other side looking at the pond and the cabin. And the researcher says, okay, well, tell me what you see now. And the kid describes the pond and the fisherman and the cabin and whatnot, whatever else they see. And then the researcher says, okay, now can you tell me what I am seeing? What does the scene look like that I'm seeing? The researcher asks, and the child says the same thing that they just said. They describe what they're now looking at with the pond and the cabin. They don't describe the side the researcher is on now. They don't describe the forest and the farm, because they're unable to say, you're a different observer. You have access to things that I don't have because your perspective is different from mine. Until a certain age, again, I think it's around the same age range as the previous one. I could be wrong. Again, it's been a while since I've looked at these things, but up to a certain age, they just repeat what they're currently looking at, the child does, instead of saying what they did saw, which is what the observer is now seeing. But after a certain age, they develop theory of mind, and they're able to say, okay, you're a different mind than me. You have a different perspective. Let me put myself in your shoes. You were where I once was, so I can relate to your position now. And then they're able to describe, correctly the forest and the farm and whatnot. So children do struggle with, one, looking into the future, two, caring about others, or even knowing about others. And so these distinctions are false, again, but there is a change that happens as you see, at a certain age range. Part of that, you could say, if you wanted to be convenient and use categories, is neurophysiological. That change that leads to the ability to look further into the future in relation to your judgments and actions, and also the ability to consider others in those things as well. But there's also a change that happens culturally and psychologically, and these things are all intertwined, but education does play a role, and discipline does play a role. These things are the social, the cultural, the milieu of the organism has just as much impact as the genetic inheritance. It's the nature and nurture helix that produces an individual. It's not one or the other. And it's also the individual itself, which can't be left out of the equation or left unconsidered. Is it too dark here? But is this gonna like... I don't know if that's better or worse. It's very yellow. Let's try the other one. It's also not great. What about the hall light? It's also, I mean, it's not as like intense, but I don't like still don't like the warmth of it. We'll just sit in the dark. So anyways, a change occurs, and yeah, part of that does come through, for example, a parent's discipline, among many, 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 many other things. And a parent's advice, and a parent's education, and a parent's relation to their child, and guidance, and modeling in terms of being an example, so on and so forth. And you also have the sacrifice of the parent to the child, and that's the second theme. Other than Pinocchio struggling to behave appropriately or responsibly, insofar as he exists among others, that's the first theme. And second to that, you have the sacrifice of the parent. You have Geppetto giving what was going to be his breakfast, so he goes without eating, to Pinocchio so that he can eat. And the coat that he pulls those plums out of, the only coat he owns, he sells just a little bit later on. He sells that coat so that he can buy Pinocchio books to go to school with. He can buy him school books so that he can get his education, so that he can develop into a responsibly acting individual. And by responsibly acting, I mean one that is aware that their actions have consequences beyond those that concern themselves. They're aware of that, and they're also aware that they are responsible for every one of their actions. Everything they do, they're responsible for. And by that, I mean that they're the only cause for it. If you believe in free will, then you also have to believe that nobody causes you to do what you do except for yourself. Taking responsibility for your actions means just that, acknowledging that you and only you are what realize your actions. But so, yeah, Geppetto sells his coat, and in the discussion, Pinocchio's like, so many times he says he wants to reform and be a good boy and get his education and treat people right, treat Geppetto right, and, go to school and not goof off and not waste money and not loaf around and be disrespectful. And so many times does he try and do this, and does he fall back on his word, and does he resort to his old ways of just being a little no-good punk. And this is one of the first times he does this. He says he wants to go to school, and Geppetto's like, but how will we get you spelling books? How will we get you your reading books, whatnot? And Pinocchio's like, well, we'll buy them, of course. We'll go to a bookstore and we'll buy them. Fucking dumb idiot Geppetto. And Geppetto's like, listen, kid, we don't have any money. And there's this line about how poverty, real poverty, is something that even boys understand, is something that even kids understand, which was really sad, because they are broke, which is why Geppetto has to go and sell his one and only coat to get Pinocchio these books. And then, you know what Pinocchio does? He's on his way to school, and he gets distracted by, of all things, a puppet show on the side of the road. And he stops. He sees like the crowd and the tent and whatnot, and he wonders what it is. And he goes over and asks about it. And they say it's a puppet show, and he's like, "Oh man, I want to go see it." And then he learns that the ticket costs money, and he's like, "Oh, how am I going to afford that?" And he asks if he can like sell, his shirt or his hat or his shoes, which are all things just made out of like essentially reused, recycled resources that Geppetto, like an acorn or some newspaper or stuff like that, that Geppetto used to make him clothes. And the guy's like, "No, I don't want that stuff." And he asks if he can sell his spelling book, and the guy's like, "No, I don't want it." And then this other man hears, and he's like, "Oh, I'll buy it from you." And of course he sells it and gets the ticket. So just an example of the parental self-sacrifice for the kid, the pursuit of forming the kid into a self and other and future conscious agent that's responsible, insofar as they acknowledge their own agency. And the kid, not doing that, just caring about himself, just pissing at, the good deeds that other people do for him. And this is something probably a lot of us can relate to. There's probably some instance you remember, from your childhood where you acted selfishly, but all children do, and that's part of growing up. As you learn, you have to do something wrong that hurts somebody else to, realize that your actions have these consequences. Usually these realizations usually don't come from other people telling you that your actions have consequences, be careful of what you do. They usually come from you fucking up. Like putting your hand on the stove is how you learn that you'll get burnt. Somebody telling you that it's too hot, don't touch it, usually doesn't have much weight to it, but the burning sensation does. So just to say that this is a common part of growing up and becoming a responsibly acting person. But Pinocchio just does it all the time. He's just the epitome of just being a selfish delinquent. But he does come around, and on the point of development and education, and the society is clearly ill in some sense. They're not. The society is not fulfilling the role that it should in terms of developing citizens that can act appropriately and responsibly in the presence of others, in the social group, in the social environment. The society, when it arrests a father for not wanting his son to disrespect him and other people running wild in the street. That society is preventing the very thing that it should be facilitating, which is why I say that it must be ill in some way. And of course, he was being satirical of, I'm sure, some social facts of his own time and place. Perhaps there are a lot of things that seem very satirical, that I do get, but I don't know, obviously, if there's like any specific references to, because I'm not of his time and place like he is. So like I believe it's a gorilla judge, and the jury is funny. In a trial, Pinocchio goes on trial as well, and Pinocchio also ends up going to jail. And you have to have these experiences to be able to sympathize with others as well. Like Pinocchio going to jail, maybe one of the things that led him to respect and sympathize with his father Geppetto, and know that like his actions led to Geppetto going to jail, acting a fool and then crying wolf, and making a hubbubaloo. And he knows how much it sucks to go to jail. And so that led him to be able to make those emotional connections with others, with Geppetto, to know that what I did led to you having to suffer this thing, which I now know how much that sucks because I went through it myself, being wrongly accused of something and arrested and thrown in jail. So anyways, there's something about like a new politician gets in office, or a new king or something like that, and they decide to release all the prisoners, all the criminals from jail, and not all, and Pinocchio goes to leave, and the guy's like, well, you're not a real criminal, you have to stay, they're only releasing the real criminals, because Pinocchio's been saying this whole time that he's innocent. And Pinocchio goes, no, like I am a real criminal. He has to confess to being a real criminal to get released from prison, because they're only keeping anyways, and which is obviously satire of something specific. I don't know, could be. But on the point of education and forming an individual in a society, Joseph Campbell, in the first volume of the Masks of the Gods series, Primitive Mythology, talks about how that is a role, obviously, of the family, yes, of society, of culture, but also of myth. He talks about how there has to be a death of the child in a rebirth of the individual into the adult. Like, that's what all of our, coming of age traditions and ceremonies and whatnot are about. But he gives the example of one from Australian mythologies and traditions. And it's really fascinating. I'm not going to try and recount it now because this is a book that we will... I'm listening to it currently. This is a book I'm listening to on Audible while I work sometimes. But so we'll do a full video on it. But I just think it's interesting. And he talks about how a society that loses its connection with myth... Oh, my camera's about to die. Fuck. Okay, we've already been recording for 40 minutes. This might have to be a 2-part video because I'll say this really quick, and there's something else I want to say. I'll just try and talk fast. Okay, so he talks about how a society that loses its touch with mythology and being able to use mythology in the formation of a person, of an individual, is also going to lose some of its ability in instilling in people a respect for the wider universe than itself. Because a concurrent theme in many mythologies, mythoses, is that there is a symmetry, there's an isomorphism between the individual and the universal, between what's internal and what's external. There's a reciprocal participation as well. There's not a separation. There's not a cutoff between you and everything else. You are everything. Everything is everything, and you're part of it. And when you lose a sense of that, because that is part of what mythology passes on between generations, is initiation into the mysteries of the universe, which that's a big part of it. As above, so below. That will be done on earth as it is in heaven, so on and so forth. Then you're going to lose the ability to create responsibly acting persons and individuals, which is modern society. Modern society looking at mythology literally or not even at all, being unable to see the truths in it, is also unable to produce people who are in touch with themselves and everything else. But another thing I want to say about Pinocchio before my camera dies is that Pinocchio is made out of a block of wood, and there's a line in the introduction where he says something about, the block of wood is humanity itself. But, and that's a cool line, whatever. I was going to try and find it and quote it to you. Maybe I'll find it and just put it as text in the post-processing, or in the whatever editing. But the block of wood is humanity. Okay, what if the creation itself, the formation of something like a block of wood into something alive, something brimming and bursting with meaning and energy and potential, that is what humanity is. The creation, the formation, the out of nothingness. The block of wood isn't nothing, of course, but it doesn't have any of those things that make Pinocchio what Pinocchio is. The behaving, the acting, the perceiving, the experiencing, the knowing, the realizing, the learning, the growing, the changing, the meaning making, the enjoying, so on and so forth. The misbehaving. Matter can't misbehave. Only a boy can misbehave. And obviously adults can misbehave as well. But you see my point, that things just are. They aren't good or bad. They don't do good or bad unless we, just decide they do. But that valuation is coming from us to them. It's part of the process of the judgment. It's not part of the process of the act of whatever we're judging, not act, but event. The events of things are not the same as the acts of people. And Pinocchio acts. The block of wood is formed into something that acts. And acting has meaning. It has moral consequence. Because there is somebody behind the action. instead of just the um, thing that undergoes the event. Things don't have responsibility. And hello, my camera died yesterday while I was recording. So this is actually the next morning. And I'm in here. I'm in the bedroom because Ava's in the living room on a phone call. I also have my microphone turned down a bit, so I have it closer to my face so I don't have to speak as loudly. So hopefully it still sounds okay. But I wanted to say, I didn't want to end the video there. I wanted to say one more thing, that Pinocchio does change. He doesn't stay a delinquent forever. And the change that most people associate with Pinocchio is the change from a puppet into a real boy. I feel like holding it closer, though, makes the plosives a little bit harsher. Anyways, I'll be easy on the P's and the B's. But the change that people commonly associate with Pinocchio, from a wooden puppet to a real flesh and blood boy, is actually driven by, its conditioned by, a necessary condition for that change to happen was that Pinocchio change his behavior. Pinocchio change his outlook on his relationships with other people and his responsibilities to himself and to others as well. And in doing that, in coming into the role of the responsibly free individual we were talking about last night at the beginning of the video, is the change that facilitates, is the inner change of Pinocchio that facilitates his outer change from being a wooden puppet to a real boy. And this is also the change that we mentioned, Joseph Campbell, last night. This is also the change that occurs when he talks about the death of the child for the second birth of the responsibly acting adult. I don't want to stretch any associations here, but you also have the idea, obviously, the point of the Joseph Campbell series we brought up, or at least one of the theses considered in the first volume, Primitive Mythology, in the Masks of the Gods series, is that there is a common cultural conscious there is a common cultural structure of human consciousness that mythologies around the globe and throughout history emerge from. And obviously mythologies take on their own contingent form based on the historical and geographic when and where it occurs in, the historic and geographic positioning. But they all express, at least this is the idea, they all express some fundamental wisdom or knowledge that sheds light on the relation of the individual with the rest of the universe, the relation between mental and physical, between two mentalities, etc. And that one of these common tropes, one of these motifs, one of these themes, one of these insights is coming of age, which involves a death and a rebirth, a death that isn't final, but like the butterfly emerging from the chrysalis. Is that the right word? Cocoon. And that is what I think is represented by the Pinocchio story. Pinocchio being formed out of the human capacity for creation, which includes procreation, and it also includes artifact creation. Pinocchio represents both of these things, being a child and being fashioned out of wood, being carved. It takes the craftsmanship of an artisan as well as, just the common biological power of procreation. Both of those things define the human capabilities of creation. The creative human capabilities. And so Pinocchio represents both of these things. And which is his first birth. His second birth is coming into individuality of his own. But what's necessary for him to have this second birth, to emerge from the chrysalis as a real boy, he must accept the ties that bind him to everything else, that bind him to his father Geppetto, that bind him to his friend that gets turned into a donkey, that bind him to the blue fairy, who saves him multiple times, and he essentially scorns her in the way he acts in repayment for all the things she does for him. But anyways, like the Christian who has to have a rebirth in Christ, like the indigenous Australian adolescent who goes through this coming of age ritual and ceremony that Joseph Campbell describes. Pinocchio also has to go through a death of the boy that he was to become the he has to undergo a death of the blockhead that he was, the donkey that he was, to become the real boy, the citizen, the promising youth that he can be. and that he is by the end of the story. And that comes about by him starting to take care of Geppetto, by him going to school and getting a job so that he can support himself and Geppetto, by, acting with gratitude and compassion and understanding towards the people that he comes across and interacts with, to not being so foolhardy and rushing into things, only caring about the possible immediate benefits they might hold, not thinking about the future consequences or the consequences towards others of those actions. He has to fail in order to realize the weight his actions have, in order to acknowledge the fact that he is acting of his own freedom, his own free will, and that therefore he's responsible for those actions, and to act in a way that accords with his values and his aspirations for himself and for others, is how he finally becomes a true boy, is reborn as a flesh and blood citizen. I think that that's at least one of the themes of Pinocchio. And it's funny because, Joseph Campbell talking about how mythology has this function in society to facilitate this rebirth in people, into those that are able to interact socially, interact in a society with, an awareness of their own responsibility for their actions. Mythology being able to facilitate that is funny because Pinocchio was actually written somewhat earlier. It always gets thrown into the classic fairy tales and folk tales and whatnot, but it was actually written much, much later than many of the classics it gets compared to and included in conversation with were. But I think that speaks to the idea that, the author said something along the lines of him wanting to make a fairy tale for his own day and age. And I think that speaks to the idea that these mythologies, these folk tales, fairy tales, these deeply rooted stories that people tell themselves and each other to understand their existential circumstances, I think it speaks to the idea that, yes, they all have their own they all may have their own contingent clothing, but they speak to fundamental truths. And last thing I'll say is that the translator, I guess, who wrote the introduction, said something along the lines of, it's a good story for all ages, for children and for the adults who haven't forgotten how to understand. And going back again to the idea that in our scientifically minded age, we oftentimes lose the ability to see the truths and the insights and the wisdom being expressed by these mythologies and stories, because we look at them literally. To look at them as being untrue truths as Plato talks about in the Republic, in the second book or something, talking about how we educate the youth with stories. We use untrue truths because they can express things deeper than, I guess, true truths sometimes. But yeah, Pinocchio was great, and definitely check it out. And don't forget how to understand the untrue truths. Goodbye and good morning and good night.